A newsroom is a fairly esoteric environment in a lot of ways, but I've found that if you can solve the development requirements of a newsroom, then you've actually solved a lot of development problems that are pretty much universal.
Hello, welcome to the DevTools-fm podcast. This is a podcast about developer tools and the people who make them. I'm Andrew, and this is my co-host, Justin.
Hi, everyone. Our guest today is Rich Harris. Rich is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, an interactive journalist at the New York Times who also somehow finds time to create high-quality tooling and frameworks like Svelte, Rollup, degit in your free time, and what free time you have. Rich, is there anything else you'd like to tell our audience about yourself?
No, I prefer to cultivate an air of mystery. Although I will correct your pronunciation. It's supposed to be degit. Everyone gets that wrong. It's like you're removing the Git parts from a Git repo.
Cool. Rich, it's honestly such a pleasure. Always really enjoy talking with you. So just to start right off, it's not an exaggeration to say that the projects that you've worked on have had a profound impact on the entire front-end JavaScript ecosystem. How do you find time to invest in this deep work when you have a job that I'm assuming is quite timely and takes some intense concentration? And I know you build tools that you use for that job. So how do you find time to do all this other stuff?
Firstly, you're very kind to say those nice things. The reality is I don't find nearly as much time as I would like, or as the projects need. As anyone who pays close attention to the development on Svelte and SvelteKit can probably attest, my track record of estimating when things are going to be done is less than stellar. But you're right that the job is pretty deadline driven. It can be pretty intense at times. And I guess I try to strike a balance by carving out opportunities to work on these projects during work hours to the extent that they're useful to the projects that I'm working on. And beyond that, it's the usual sort of evenings and weekends sacrifice that I just try to balance with having a normal life. But it's tough. There aren't enough hours in the day.
Yeah, I feel you. Maybe for people who don't know about what you do, could you explain more like what your role is at?
I can. So I'm on the graphics department at the Times, which is a team of, I think, about 50 or so people who are all some combination of journalist and designer and developer. In that mix, we also have people who specialize in things like cartography. And the department, it does many things. It responds to breaking news events. It'll quickly provide locator maps to tell you where a particular disaster is happening, or it will put together visual explainers of what we know about a current news event. But it will also do these deep dives into stories that are best told visually. Good example would be some of the work that my coworkers did around the Olympics, doing these really detailed breakdowns with motion capture of how different athletes in different disciplines perfected their craft. And it really spans the gamut from quick, 2-hour turnaround projects to these months-long deep dives. For the last 2 years, I've mostly been working on our coronavirus tracker, which is a set of pages that show you where coronavirus cases are in the US and around the world. More recently, I did some Olympics coverage of my own. And in the background, I spend a lot of time thinking about our production workflows and how we can be more efficient in the creation of interactive graphics.
So going off of that, is that where all of your various frameworks spun out of? I don't think most people would hear your job title and what you do and go, oh yeah, he's going to create the competitor to Webpack. How did that come about?
It kind of did come out of the requirements of working in a newsroom. So the thing that you're referring to, Rollup, is something that I started while I was working at my previous job at The Guardian. And it was essentially because the tools that were dominant at the time just frankly didn't do a great job of delivering efficient code. I think Browserify was the market leader at the time, and Browserify was a revolution when it came out. It enabled things that previously weren't possible, but it had a cost to doing so. And the cost was paid in terms of extra bytes for your bundle and extra bytes for each module of your code base. So if you were following best practices and writing modular code, then you paid a penalty for that. A few years ago, ES modules were starting to become a thing, and it seemed like there was an opportunity to rethink how bundlers worked based on the new native module syntax that had just been standardized or was maybe in the process of becoming standardized. That was motivated very much by the fact that when you're writing code in a newsroom environment, you're writing apps that are going to sit on a page that you don't control. And your JavaScript is the last thing that gets to load. We've already got ads and analytics and readers' comments and like all of these things that are contributing to the weight of the page. And the last thing that you want to have on top of that is for your code to be unnecessarily large and slow to execute. It was very much motivated by the needs of producing stuff that was as small as possible for that context.
Yeah, I heard on another podcast where the naming came from, and I find it like vastly interesting that you make something for a newspaper and chose to call it Rollup. So I just want to shout that out as some of the best naming I've seen.
Yeah, I went through a few different potential names, but the sort of image of a paperboy standing on the street corner, Rollup, they're all about it. Just seemed to make sense.
So my partner works at the New York Times on the engineering side. And I hear that there's a pretty fundamental divide between like engineering generally at New York Times and the newsroom, the journalism side of the house. It's like they try to keep things pretty separated out purposefully. So you've mentioned that you spent a lot of time thinking about like how to ship production assets as you're building these visual interactions, you and your team. Are there any like tensions between you and the engineering organization that crops up, given that you sort of like, and New York Times broadly is like a React shop and you have different needs, of course, but is that something that like crops up from time to time?
Not really, no. That cultural divide does exist. It's a sort of industry-wide thing that the newsroom tends to be distinct from the rest of the company, largely to allow to prevent commercial pressures from leaking into how we think about coverage. I don't know that it's as sacrosanct as it sounds in the context of newsroom versus engineering, but it does exist. And I think as a result of that, they've always been very careful to make sure that we have this sandpit in which we can do whatever we like. So when we're building interactive graphics that go in articles, we're not thinking about how it interacts with the React app that nytimes.com consists of. The idea is that in the future, we could completely rethink how NY Times is built, and all of the content that we've written for it would continue to work because we're not making any assumptions about the environment beyond this is a web page, or indeed an HTML document that is being viewed in the web view of a native app. So because of that, it's really not something that we generally think about at all. There are occasionally moments when like the abstraction leaks, like we've had problems in the past with the hydration step, the React hydration step, nuking things that are already on the page. And so there are some pretty complex workarounds that allow the stuff that we've got on the page not to get clobbered by the hydration. But by and large, it's not something that we really think about.
Speaking of the Olympics and all the different visualization work that you've done, what have you enjoyed building the most? I don't know the exhaustive list of what you've worked on, but could you point to one example that you found really enjoyable to build?
Yeah, the most recent project that I did is probably the most fun I've had for a long time. It was a project around the Olympics. Essentially, the backstory here is that news organizations in the US are not permitted to use any video footage from the games at all because the rights are exclusively held by NBC. And yet we want to be able to tell people the results of the races, obviously, because people rely on news organizations like us to know who just won 100 meters. And so we have a choice. We can either describe what happened or we can find a new way to show it. And what we settled on was a kind of a data visualization, which sort of looks like the race is happening in animated form in the context of a video that appears inside a tweet or inside an Instagram story. And so what we built was an app for generating these videos based on data that came from the live feed from the Olympics. So we would get this big blob of JSON and turn it into a video. Ideally, in the space of 5 minutes or so, we would have these videos ready to tweet out. So almost real time, we're showing what happened without being able to show what happened. And it was tremendous fun because the number of interesting engineering challenges that you have to solve to be able to do something like that is quite long. And we got to use some new toys, like we used FFmpeg WASM for the first time, which is a way of running FFmpeg to generate videos inside a browser, all client side, which means that you can see the progress of how your video is rendering, and then you can immediately hit a button and it gets sent to some backend somewhere and is ready for publication. Got to play a lot with 3JS as well, which was tremendous fun. And just like all the design and animation questions that fall out of that, like how do we make it look like these little miniature people are doing breaststroke versus butterfly and front crawl versus back crawl. It was great. I had a blast.
So with a project like that, are there like super tight time constraints around it? Do you know for months, we're going to be doing this Olympics thing, and you prepare for it? Or it's like, well, Olympics is 2 weeks out. Sprint's time to go. Let's build it.
So events like the Olympics, like we obviously know that they're coming months in advance. And it's similar for things like elections, where they're on our calendar for at the start of the year. We know that it's a thing that we're going to have to invest time in. Inevitably, we never start on these things until too late because there's always stuff going on. But in this case, I think we started about 2.5 months before the Olympics, and we really got into gear like maybe a couple of weeks after that. So I think we spent maybe 2 very intense months preparing for that. And then the 2 weeks of the games themselves, obviously we were up at all hours of the day because everything's happening in Japanese time. So we're up at antisocial hours, like manning the app that we've built and generating these videos and tweeting them out. So it's not like it took us by surprise, but there's never as much time as you would like to have for things like these, even when you know that they're coming. So
you and the folks who've been working on Svelte semi-recently, I guess maybe, has it been a few months now, released Svelte Kit, which is a replacement for Sapper, static site generator, plus I think like similar, if people are familiar with Next.js or Nux, it like fills a similar sort of space. I had heard in places that you were using that at the times for some projects. Is that true? Have you been dogfooding that? We've dogfooded it extensively. The coronavirus tracker that I described earlier is this page that has, or this app that has a page for the US and for every state in the US, for every county in the US, plus selected countries and a few other non-geographical pages. And initially that was built with the same set of tools that we use for all of our other graphics. When we decided that we wanted to start publishing those county pages, we just realized that we weren't going to be able to publish thousands of pages multiple times a day with new data. And I was tasked with figuring out how we were going to build this in a more scalable fashion. At the time, SvelteKit was very early in its development, but it already seemed like the thing that met most of our requirements. It's able to function as a static site generator, which we need because we're generating HTML and then shoving it into a CMS. We don't have any servers anywhere. A lot of the app was already built using Svelte components, so we could reuse a lot of our existing work. And, it so happens that there's a guy on the team who is building both the tracker and the framework. So if anything breaks, then we can just yell at him. So for all of these reasons, we settled on SvelteKit, even though it was a pretty early project at that stage. Obviously, we ran into some teething problems as you would with any new project, but on the whole, it was a really good dogfooding experience. And the things that we learned building that fed back into the framework and made it more flexible and more robust. We then reused it for the Olympics project that I just described. The app that generates those videos, it is a SvelteKit app. Unbeknownst to me, some coworkers elsewhere in the newsroom were building a separate Olympics app with SvelteKit. And I found out well into the development of that when they ran into a couple of issues and sought help. But yes, I think those 3 apps, probably the only time that it's been used for anything so far at the times, but our experience has been fairly positive. So hopefully we'll use it again for other things.
Svelte itself seen a lot of adoption at the times, or has it been mostly outside of your workplace where it's gained its most traction?
For a long time, it was very much outside. I wasn't interested in proselytizing it and convincing people to stop using the tools that they were already familiar with. But it happened organically over time. People would start using it because maybe we had worked together on a project and they'd become introduced to Svelte that way, or they'd seen me talking about it on Twitter and got curious. And gradually it's become a fairly major part of how the graphics department works. And that's actually been really gratifying because the people that I work with are journalists, and journalists are by nature very skeptical people. generally, most people aren't writing JavaScript because they love it. They're writing JavaScript because, unfortunately, we need to write JavaScript to do the kind of work that we do. And so when people say, I hate learning new things, but I decided to learn this one new thing and I love it, that's really nice to hear. And so it is now pretty core to how a lot of the work gets done, but it's by no means like mandated. There are plenty of people in the department who still haven't touched it and probably never will. And that's totally fine. Everyone can use the tools that they're most comfortable with.
A lot of fun watching Svelte grow. The sort of recent, what was it, Stack Overflow, who does the normal like web development survey, or not web development, but the big survey. So Svelte's gaining a lot of traction, at least from reported results on that, which has to be also very gratifying.
It is gratifying. The State of JS survey came out at the start of the year, and Svelte was listed as the framework that had the most satisfaction. And then the Stack Overflow thing was more recent, and it had a similar finding. I do take those with a big grain of salt, honestly, because the kind of people who respond to those surveys are far from necessarily representative of the developer population as a whole.
Yeah.
And you've also got to factor in the fact that the people who are using Svelte at the moment are generally doing so because they're in a position to choose their tools. If it becomes more popular and companies are choosing to use Svelte, and then people who would not otherwise have chosen Svelte are being forced to work on it, then their satisfaction is probably not going to be as high. So yes, we are doing very well at the moment in terms of the surveys that people see on Twitter, but I'm trying to not let that go to our heads too much.
Sure.
So when you build these projects, do you intend for them to be used at the times, or are you just making them to scratch your own itch and they just happen to catch fire in the wild?
I mean, it's always to scratch my own itch. It so happens that my itches are generally work related. I'm building stuff at work and the tool that I want doesn't yet exist. So, roll up your sleeves. And what I've generally found is that a lot of other people are itchy in the same places that I am. Sorry, that sounded gross. A lot of people have the same needs that we do. A newsroom is a fairly esoteric environment in a lot of ways, but I've found that if you can solve the development requirements of a newsroom, then you've actually solved a lot of development problems that are pretty much universal. Our feedback loops are very tight and our deadlines are very strict. And if you can create tools that succeed in that environment, then the chances are it's gonna succeed elsewhere. And I think we've seen that with other things that have come out of newsrooms like Django and Underscore and D3 and Backbone. These are all newsroom products that have since become widely adopted in the industry.
Oh, wow. I didn't know all those different tools had come out of newsrooms. Funding open source is hard, and building a community is even harder. With your most successful projects, how do you keep them going? Do you just hope that your Twitter followers will be like, oh, this is awesome shit, and then start helping? Or do you look for funding?
I always dread the funding question because I have so many conflicting feelings about funding in open source. And the truth is we've just hidden from that whole question. Svelte does have an open collective and lots of people generously donate to it. And we've always talked about what that funding would enable us to do, but thus far we've only really used that funding to meet the expenses of hosting the Svelte website and things like that. The reality is that money doesn't translate directly into well-maintained projects. There's a lot more to it than that. And the people who work on Svelte, we're a pretty tight-knit team. We all work on it because we enjoy the project, we enjoy the community, we enjoy each other's company. No one's working on it for money directly. And so we've always just been very uncomfortable whenever the subject comes up. And I know we need to get over that. We need to figure out a way to translate people's generosity in terms of funding into a more regular release cadence. But so far that has eluded us. It has been a little bit better in the case of Rollup. I'm not directly involved in Rollup maintenance anymore, but I'm still part of that world. And the money that has gone into the Rollup Open Collective has directly funded a lot of the work that has kept that project going. That is something that is really nice to see, because Rollup continues to play a pretty big role in the ecosystem. Like, a lot of people probably don't fully realize just how much stuff is built on top of Rollup. It's sort of the secret sauce behind a lot of different projects. Like Vite, for example. Vite is having a moment in the sun right now. It's a wonderful tool. It's the thing that enables SvelteKit, but the thing underneath Vite is largely Rollup. I don't know if that would be the case if we hadn't managed to get that funding. But to answer the question about whether that's something that I go into a project thinking about, absolutely not. I'm the least far-sighted person in open source. I just have a thing that I want to make, and I make it, and then I'm like, oh, maybe someone else would find this useful. I throw it off on GitHub, and then, I realize a few months down the line that I've committed myself to maintaining this thing. And if I'm lucky, then the community will come along and help. And that has happened many times, and I'm always extremely grateful when that happens. But it's not because of any masterful planning or strategy on my part whatsoever. It's because we happen to be in a very generous and public-spirited community.
Well, I've got a question for you then that might be hard to answer, because I really am curious what you think about what comes after SvelteKit, or like what the sort of continuation of this ecosystem might look like. So there's a lot of effort spent on making Svelte like really solid, and it's great. It's a pretty amazing tool for building, especially interactive UI today. And then SvelteKit is continuing to evolve. It's getting better. Also, just a very solid sort of platform for building sites. Is like, do you see anything else coming into this ecosystem to add to it? Or is it just like the improvement of these tools?
There's so much work to do on SvelteKit and Svelte already. I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to get a stable version of SvelteKit out fairly soon. But even after that, there's a bunch of things that we have in mind that will probably be post 1.0. And then Svelte itself, we have a pretty large backlog of issues at this point. But even once we've got a better control of that, once we get some breathing room after the launch of SvelteKit, we have this very long wish list and a very long roadmap of what's going to be in Svelte 4 and beyond. And I don't want to talk about that stuff too much, because I don't want to make promises that we end up not keeping, or at least not keeping for a while. But there's so much work that's going to keep us occupied that I'm not really thinking too deeply about what comes next. The one thing that I am quite excited about at the moment is Svelte 3, which is the library that we used on that Olympics project to render the little blue people that were running around our little Lego track. That was tremendous fun to build, and I think it makes the process of working with 3D scenes much easier. It's to 3JS as Svelte itself is to the DOM in a way. I love working with 3JS, but it's a lot easier if you have a component model around it. And so hopefully in the fairly near future, I'm going to be able to just get that over the line and open source it. At the moment, it doesn't have any documentation. It doesn't have any tests, any of that stuff, but it is a functional library. And so it's things like that. I think it's fleshing out the ecosystem with all of the different component libraries that you expect to find in a mature ecosystem. And we're getting there. A lot of that stuff already exists, but there's always more to do. Our work is never finished.
Yeah, it's awesome. But even as early as SvelteKit is, it's pretty solid. There's a lot of great ideas in there too. I particularly like just like things like direct flags for turning on hydration or turning off hydration, or pre-rendering or not pre-rendering, server-side rendering, not server-side. Like that kind of stuff is simple, but the touches, like it's nice.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you. We started that journey back in 2017 when we started building Sapper, which was our first attempt at a Next.js for Svelte. And we learned a lot in the process of building that and the environment. At the same time, there's been this big shift towards serverless environments and things like Cloudflare workers. And SvelteKit is really us saying it's more work to try and take Sapper and modernize it than it would be to just start again with a new code base. And I think that decision has paid off. I think we've got something that people are really going to enjoy once it goes stable.
There was a question that I had about SvelteKit in particular, actually. And this is just an interesting language thing. So SvelteKit, when you use it for static site generation, refers to it as pre-rendering, which is typically in the times before, in the before times, that was like what we called, hey, we want a spa and we want to like have some HTML on the page like first. So there's a lot of pre-rendering services out there that provided that. The evolution of language is interesting. I think Next.js has really shifted a lot of mind share and how they refer to static site generation versus, I don't know, they have incremental regeneration and a bunch of other stuff. How do you think about naming those sorts of features, and like how did that come out? Hey, we want to call this pre-rendering, which it functionally is, but just curious.
Yeah, it's a mishmash of looking around and seeing what other people have decided to call things and taking the best ideas and otherwise just sort of going with the dominant convention. SSR versus SSG versus and SPA versus MPA, all of that stuff. It is needlessly confusing. And we desperately need some better TLAs to describe this stuff, because even the fact that the SS in SSR and SSG don't mean the same thing. Like, how is anyone supposed to come into this and make sense of it? I got into a conversation recently on Twitter about the relative merits of multi-page apps versus single-page apps. And after a while, people who weren't close to the conversation but was getting snippets of it out of context thought that I was talking about something like an SPA from the early 2010s, where you would start with a blank page and then everything gets rendered with JavaScript. And I don't think people are really doing that anymore by and large. I know some people are, but no one's recommending that you build apps that way. But the conversations that we're having aren't taking into account the current state of the art and the current recommendations in how we build sites. And that is to the detriment of our collective progress, because we get so hung up on the sort of tribalism of these different approaches that we're unable to really get at the nuance of what techniques actually give users the best experience. And it's a shame, because we're all trying to push in the same direction, but we're all talking past each other because of these stupid 3-letter acronyms that don't make any sense. But I don't have a better one yet. I'm trying to think of some better acronyms that can more adequately describe what projects like SvelteKit are trying to do, but it's a work in progress.
Adding another acronym always helps.
Yeah, it's that HKCD comic.
Exactly.
The 14 existing standards. I don't know. Maybe we just stop using acronyms. Maybe we just start saying what things actually are.
Yeah. That's like what jumped out to me about the pre-rendering. It's a small thing, but it's like, oh yeah, well.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely bike-shedded that one a little bit. The one that we haven't managed to figure out is the word context. Context is one of these words that comes up in development in so many different contexts, and it always means something subtly different. And it's a very useful word, but if you have too many different things that are called context, and they're not the exact same concept, then you're going to end up confusing people. And so far, I think we have maybe 3 different things that are called context in either Svelte or SvelteKit. We need to get that down to 2 or 1. And so far, we haven't been able to. Naming stuff is hard.
Oh, definitely. One of the hardest problems in programming right there. So speaking of Twitter arguments, I've seen you, I've seen you advocate for the web platform a lot of the time. What comes to mind is web components. I've seen you in many a web components argument. But what part of the future of the web are you most excited about? It might not be web components, but where do you see this all going?
It's definitely not web components, I can tell you that. I wish I had a good answer for you. The truth is, I'm not all that optimistic about the web. I'm actually quite fearful for the web's future. I think we have reached a point where the platform's complexity is getting out of hand. And the fact that the different browser vendors don't see eye to eye on a lot of these things, and there seems to be a lot of acrimony between the different browser vendors that is actively hampering harmonious standards work from proceeding, is bad for all of us. And it's worse when you have commercial interests that are at odds with the needs of the web. I wrote recently about I don't know if you remember the alert debacle, where Chrome removed alert and confirm and prompt from cross-origin iframes, but also confirmed that they plan to do so for non-cross-origin iframes. They just want to remove those APIs from the web platform. I wrote about how I'm very concerned that the people who are deciding what form the web is going to take aren't necessarily the people who should be stewarding the platform. The web is something that belongs to all of us. And yet the only people who have any meaningful say over the direction that it evolves in are browser vendors. And realistically, there's only 2 browser vendors that matter. And those 2 vendors are at loggerheads. And so truthfully, I'm a little despondent about the future of the web. I hope that I'm unduly pessimistic. I hope that it's not as bad as I feared, but it's hard to see a really obvious path out of the mess that we've found ourselves in recently. I guess if I was a little less cynical, I would talk about Web3 being this shining beacon of hope. But for me, it's so difficult to separate all of these ideas about privacy and decentralization and ownership of your data and all of these other things, to separate that from the crypto bullshit Ponzi stuff is really difficult. And so even that, which the Web3 stuff, philosophically, it really speaks to me, but it seems to have been conflated with just the worst thing that technology has delivered in the last several years. And I just don't see a way out of it.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that crypto bros exist too, because there's all this cool technology and decentralized identity and the metaverse are all super cool ideas that could make the web such a new and interesting place. But everybody's bogged down with the fact that, oh, this guy's trying to sell me some JPEGs. And it's like,
Yeah. I guarantee that people are going to listen to this episode and yell at us on Twitter precisely because of this conversation that we're having right now. It's so dumb.
We welcome your comments.
Yeah, we post clips to TikTok, and our most viewed TikTok is where I said something about NFTs, and like the amount of people that both call me stupid and are like, "Oh, this guy knows it," and crypto is bullshit. Just inundated with those. So we'll probably get a few for this too.
How to start a flame war, step 1.
Yeah, mention crypto.
Cool. Shall we go to tooltips?
The first tooltip I'm going to talk about is Pauper.js. I've used this little library countless times and just countless different components that I've had to create. What Pauper.js does is it does all that hairy math of calculating where it should place a div in relation to another div when something happens. So a common use case is a tooltip or a context menu or anything about that. It's really nice. I just use the base library. I don't find the need for any of the library specific wrappers around it. But it's really good. At my old job at Intuit, we were starting to make our own Pauper.js, but then eventually realized there's just so many edge cases and so many things you'd want to make it do that we should just rely on what the community's come up with. And I can't recommend it enough.
Yep, it's pretty solid.
Yeah, I never used it, but it looks cool.
There is this project called InAPI RS. It is a Rust bridge for Node. Generally, if you want to write a native module to interact with a Node.js app, you can do that using this. Specifically, though, this is a pull request to that repo. It's 696. I saw it retweeted by Jared Palmer. But it provides this macro that makes memory mapping from JavaScript to Rust pretty seamless. So previously you'd have a lot of boilerplate to say, hey, I want to write a function in Rust and make it compatible with JavaScript. And you'd have to do a lot of type marshalling and a bunch of other stuff. But they're adding this macro that makes it trivial to do this cross-definition authoring of Rust code that you want to run from Node. So anyway, if you're interested in Rust, if you're interested in writing native modules for Node, definitely check this library out. Once this PR lands, I imagine it'll change a lot for the better, which is pretty cool. Especially given now that I'm doing a lot of Rust. So
I'm very upset because this is one less reason that I have for not learning Rust. I have to learn Rust now.
Yeah, everything's moving to Rust. I just saw a tweet from Sebastian on Rome, and they're actually rewriting it all in Rust. So they weren't lying when they said Rome wasn't built in a day. It's going to take a little bit longer now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm starting at a company called Oxide on Monday, and they are a Rust shop entirely. So it is a foregone conclusion that I dive deeply into this world.
Yeah, you got to put on your Rustation hat.
I think Oxide is a play on that, right?
Oh, I'm not sure many people will get that reference.
Yeah. This tool has been around a little while, actually, and I've been using it for a while, but I don't think it gets enough love. It's essentially a to-do list, but a hierarchical to-do list. It's called Workflowy, and it allows you to structure your thoughts or your tasks in kind of the same way that you would fill in a Google Doc, but it's also very easy to convert that into a hierarchical list because tasks are inherently hierarchical. And you can also add like tags and things like that. It's just a really easy way to structure your thoughts without having the structure imposed upon you. And you can share a subtree of your task list with other people and you can work on it collaboratively. And I've just found it to be a really great product.
Yeah, Workflow is awesome. So it's an inliner and like each bullet point can be its own page. This is, I think, a large inspiration for Roam Research, which basically is Workflowy, except you can do backlinks. I don't know if Workflowy had added that functionality, but I think that's basically the biggest difference between the two. That's the backlink. So, well, Roam does other stuff like your special embeds and stuff now, but
that does make me want to try Roam, which I haven't.
Roam is really interesting. So I'm pretty interested in the tools for thought space, which this firmly falls into, but I used Workflowy many years ago and really enjoyed the process of doing so. And definitely when I started using Roam, this is exactly the thing that I thought of. It just felt exactly like Workflowy. So like when you hit Roam, you have a page for your current day and you do like a Workflowy like interface. And every day that passes, you can infinite scroll through all your days of notes or whatever. But then you have this backlinking ability. You like do double square brackets and it automatically creates a link. And if you type in something that doesn't exist, it just creates a page for it. You like hit it and it goes to that page. And again, it's also a bullet point. It's a Workflowy style document. All of these inliners are really good. There's a ton of them. There's another open source one called LogSec, LogSeq, I think, which is Roam Research-esque, but open source. Andrew and I use Obsidian a lot, which is different. It's not an inliner. It's just a markdown tool, but it has like backlinking and you can do the hierarchical things with the bullet points. It's different. But yeah, this is a fun space.
Okay, my last tool tip for the day. The image is broken because it's not quite public yet. It's a React library that you're going to look at it and go, why the hell would I want to do that? It is called React JSON Reconciler. And it's a reconciler for JSON in React. What does that mean? It means that you can write React trees that serialize to JSON, and then you have JSON. You might ask yourself, why the hell would I want to do that? So what we had at Intuit was a way for backend devs to create whole entire flows out of JSON. And we had a front-end library called the player that would play that JSON. But one thing that we came to learn over the years of supporting it was that nobody likes to write all their stuff in JSON. Nobody wants to be a JSON developer. What this library allows you to do, and it's written by one of the guys that's still on that team at Intuit. He was also on this podcast, Adam Dierkens. It allows you to author that JSON just like you would React. So you can have a bunch of functional components that return this JSON reconciler JSX, and then even use hooks for like state and effects. And then in the end, when you've rendered everything, you get the JSON that we then feed into the front end. So you might look at this README and go, why the hell would I want that? Well, there's why the hell. Big shout out to that team. They have some big stuff coming out this year, and I think this is just the tip of it.
This reminds me, there was an article by this app called Judo. Their site is judo.app, and I'll put the article in the show notes. And they talk about this thing called server-driven UI, which is highly confusing for what they really mean. They really mean just having JSON payloads that sort of drive native UI experiences. So essentially doing this, but mostly I think targeting like mobile apps. So it's like you build out your sort of like components and your native components in your mobile apps, and you just like send it big JSON payloads, and that like constructs the views and everything. I think Airbnb and Lyft and some others are doing this broadly. So this would be an interesting way to build that sort of product experience if you felt like getting pretty complicated and fancy.
Yeah. To make it maybe a more understandable example is if you've ever heard of the library JSONette, this would just be a way to render JSONette content like you would normal React components.
JSONette is now JSONL after the original sort of creator of that just disappeared. Not sure what happened to him or her.
Sometimes maintenance is a little much. I can feel for that guy.
My last tooltip for the day is a state management library. I really don't like state management generally. It's like oftentimes the biggest source of complexity. Rich, I have to give you and all the Svelte folks tremendous props for Svelte Store because it is, in my mind, like the golden standard of doing state management.
Thank you.
Svelte has an excellent story around that. I feel like Vue over the years has had a very consistent story around state management. React has always been like the Wild West. You just got to figure shit out. It's been rare that I get in a React app and I'm like, oh, wow, this is really well done. Like, y'all done a great thing here. It's always like, holy shit, what happened? Anyway, this library is a tiny state management library called Mutik. I think that's how it's pronounced, Mutik. It's by Jared Palmer. It's 496 bytes or something, not counting the Emmer library, which it pulls in. It actually uses an upcoming React API, which currently it's called use mutable source right now, but it's going to be changed to something else before React 18 releases, I believe. But it's trivial. There's literally one file to this. It's maybe 200 lines of source, maybe not even that.
97 lines of source.
97. Yeah. You can read it. You can understand it. It's just really, really nice. I've got a terminal-based solitaire game, and I use that to play with state management like things in React. I use React Inc to render it out, and I just really haven't found something that like just is nice and simple. And then I ran across this, and it's good. This isn't something that Jared's like doing in a lot of active work on. I think this is mostly a proof of concept, but it's excellent. The API, the React API that this is built on, the React team is like recently improving, and they hope to ship that. And basically, their hope is that any state management solutions that have external state, especially if you like use streams or something, if the state lives globally and you can mutate it outside of your React app, they want you to use this new API to make it simpler to deal with edge cases and run concurrent rendering and everything. But evidently, it's also a really good way to make a really simple state management API.
So the README said that this was based on Immer, which is an incredible tool. Is that the main difference between Immer and this, that this is using that upcoming API?
So this uses Immer.
Oh, it actually uses Immer. I see.
It does use Immer. Yes. It's got a few influences for like its API shape. Ultimately, you have a function called create store, and you just pass it an initial state or whatever, initial state of your store. And that gives you this object that you can reference globally, like anywhere you want. And it has basically just this one, well, it has a few functions, but it has like this, you can do store.mutate, and then just like inside of that's like an Immer produce function. So you can just mutate your state or whatever, and then it'll update the state of the world. And it has a few React hooks for integrating it with your app, but it's enormously simple, and I am having a blast with it. So
if I'm not mistaken, this hook was also created to support things like Redux. So
Yes.
they've been working heavily with all of those people in the state management community to get this into a usable state. Because I was looking at upgrading to React 17 for our Electron app, but when you have thousands of lines of Redux code, that's quite a big barrier. So I'm excited to see those APIs finally land so we can look at upgrading.
yeah, I have mixed feelings about React's sort of evolution. They're solving the UI problems in a very sophisticated and very complex way. Because of that, they have to provide sort of APIs for libraries to do the sort of right thing with concurrent rendering and suspense and everything. Like building things in user land that interact with React can be really, really hard. I don't really know how I feel about that broadly, but I am glad that they're doing the extra work to provide these APIs to make it possible and give you a better sort of path forward. So I'm excited about that. But I will say, Rich, I do still appreciate your approach because ultimately moving a lot of this complexity out of runtime into a compiler, trying to simplify things where you can, and I approve of that, which is no diss on the React team or any of the amazing work that they've done or anybody that uses React still.
I think it speaks to the fact that there's room for both projects to coexist peacefully. They have very different philosophies in a lot of ways, and I will freely acknowledge that React is solving problems at the moment that Svelte doesn't really have an opinion on, because React is being used to build Facebook. Svelte is not. They have encountered problems using React, and they are coming up with some very clever solutions to those problems. And I think that the work they're doing is absolutely inspirational, but I also question the need for a lot of it in a lot of contexts. I think it's very important that people have alternatives to React that are a little bit easier to fit around, where you don't need to use these fairly complex APIs. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of space for evolution in all of these projects for some time to come.
Now for our most important tooltip of the day, Rich's pasta maker.
Yeah, I might have misunderstood what you meant when you said that I had to suggest some tools that I'm excited about. As soon as we finish recording this podcast, we're going to go and make some fresh pasta. If you enjoy eating pasta, which I know a lot of people do, just buy yourself a pasta maker. You will never eat box pasta ever again. It will change everything.
Are you just talking about like the rolly machine thing?
Yeah, I've got one of the very simple ones where it's got a vise and you affix it to a kitchen surface, and then you just feed dough through it a few times until it flattens out, and you've got this long ribbon of pasta, and then you just put it through the second one that turns it into fettuccine or whatever you want. It's very straightforward and actually kind of therapeutic. So I recommend that for anyone who eats pasta.
Yeah, +1.
That's it for this week's episode of DevTools-fm. Thanks for coming on, Rich. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Be sure to follow us on YouTube and wherever you consume your podcasts. Thanks for listening.